Thank you, Sue. It is so great to see you, and really just an honor to be with you all this afternoon. I do want to lodge a complaint at the top of my speech and just say next time, don't ever put me behind Hakeem, please, or Brandon and Yasmin. Thank you for considering this in the future, because I will not live up to this or come close. So just should this ever happen again, I just want to lodge that complaint and that consideration. It is great, as I said, to see you, Sue, excuse me, and want to recognize and thank Deanna for her leadership and for the many innovative ways that she brings directly impacted people's voices to policy tables all across this country. And of course, thank you for the invitation to join this celebration today. I want to recognize the two Leading with Conviction alumni speakers, Brandon Smith, who's one of my oldest friends. We've known each other for 20 years, and I could not be more proud of the work he's leading at FFRP, and Yasmin Arrington. I think it was around 2015 when you were a featured speaker at the National Mentoring Summit in Washington, D.C. I was at OJP at the time, and I walked over with our then Assistant Attorney General Carol Mason, who was also providing remarks at that event. And I remember how impressive and inspiring you were. You were all that Carol and I talked about on our walk back, and I've remembered your name ever since. And so it is wonderful to see you today. As Sue said, this is in some ways a little bit of a homecoming for me, given my past work with JOUSA. And I'm so glad to see that so many familiar faces among staff and among the board who were there for the organization then and continue to be with the organization now. I'll share a bit about our work at OJP in a little bit, because we view ourselves as partners in this work. And I don't know that that's the first thing that comes to people's mind when they think of the DOJ. And so would love to share a bit about the work we're doing specifically at the Office of Justice Programs. But first, I want to talk about the significance of this event and the importance of JLUSA's work overall. When I first entered the criminal justice field 15 years ago, I did so as an advocate who thought we needed people on the inside to help move community-centered policies forward. At that time, I was one of the few people at the policy table who could, or perhaps at least did, speak openly about knowing people in the system, about losing friends to gang violence, about seeing others enter the system only to come out worse off. I leveraged my seat at that table and tried to channel the voices of so many others who didn't have the opportunity to be there. In New York City, in particular, we are fortunate beyond measure to have so many well-established, well-respected, formerly incarcerated leaders and nonprofit executives who I often turn to for advice, guidance, and input, both to inform my work and to make sure that their voices made it into the room, even if they were not physically present. Well, today, I am no longer one of the only people at the policy table lifting up the experiences of directly impacted people. Far from it, in fact. More and more of the field is finally recognizing the importance of having directly impacted voices at the table and in positions of leadership. This is thanks, at least in part, and in no small part, to the incredible work of this organization. And I'm thankful for all the ways that JOUSA has opened doors and broken down barriers. And we aren't only talking about organizations and philanthropic funders, both of which are vitally important, but also some government agencies coming to the table as well. I'm proud to say that at the Office of Justice Programs, we have multiple colleagues, second chance fellows and staff alike, who have been directly impacted by incarceration. And while not a current OJP staffer, JOUSA's own Deanna Hoskins was once a senior policy advisor here. So the work that you put into Leading with Conviction, the Leading with Conviction program, represented by today's celebration, will not only benefit you and your organizations, but the field at large. And as Sue outlined at the top, the impact that fellows have had across the country is frankly too great to put numbers on. Because having prepared insightful leaders who can leverage their life experiences to bring increased understanding and awareness, To elevate policy perspectives and solutions that might not otherwise surface is absolutely essential to advancing community safety, to reducing incarceration, and to making our nation more just. So I'm going to turn now, as I said, we view ourselves as partners. So I'm going to turn for just a moment to the work we do at OJP, because we do want to be partners in this work, and we view ourselves as such. As Sue mentioned, OJP is the largest of DOJ's grant-making components. A large part of our mission is to help criminal justice, juvenile justice, and victim service professionals, including community-based organizations and other non-government stakeholders, to do their jobs more fairly and more effectively. We help local and state policymakers by elevating best practices aimed at reducing crime and advancing equity, ensuring equal access to justice, and ideally, shrinking the corrections footprint. We are also home to the science and statistical arms of DOJ, and their work helps inform our efforts and the national conversation. At OJP, our focus is on both advancing community safety and promoting equity in our justice systems. For us, these are twin goals that mutually reinforce one another. Community safety and equal justice must go hand in hand, and we are thinking about our work in new ways to meet the moment. For example, back in July, the president unveiled his Safer America plan, and while a couple aspects of this plan received most of the public attention, the plan also calls for a 10-year, $15 billion investment for a program called Accelerating Justice System Reform. This funding, if Congress approves it, would provide state, local, and tribal governments with resources for activities that promote equity, foster community trust, and reduce disparate impacts on people of color and other historically disadvantaged communities. The goal here is to incentivize reforms at the state and local levels to curb unnecessary incarceration, to support front-end reforms, to reduce disparities in the system, and address public health issues like substance use and mental health disorders in the community so that these do not fall to justice system professionals at all. If funded, the first installment would be $300 million in FY23 and would open up opportunities for a wide range of strategies, such as developing cross-system partnerships so that communities can better serve people with behavioral health disorders and keep them out of the system. Prevention programs and alternatives to youth incarceration are envisioned as a key part of this effort, as are reentry services and pretrial programs. What we're ultimately hoping to do is to help build community infrastructure so that we can collectively contribute to stronger and safer communities. And I'll very briefly talk about a couple of other aspects. One of our other top priorities is finding ways to reach communities that have been historically marginalized and excluded from accessing federal funding by building on the President's executive order on advancing equity and racial justice. This year, OJP, for the first time, is giving priority consideration to grant applications that promote racial justice and equity. And we're paying special attention to applicants that can demonstrate their capabilities and competencies are enhanced because they identify as culturally specific organizations. What this means is if you are proposing a grant to advance racial equity, and if you are yourself from an organization that identifies as culturally specific because of the work that you do and the staff that you have, we are looking to elevate those applications through the priority consideration process. We're also making a concerted effort to reach victims and survivors whose experience of victimization has never been properly acknowledged or addressed. We know that there are many people, especially in historically underserved and marginalized communities, who have suffered years of trauma and who have never gotten the help they need, yet their first encounter with the justice system is through an arrest. This is flat out wrong. And if we hope to break the cycle of victimization and violence, we know that our first order of business is to address the history of trauma. Last year, our Office for Victims of Crime awarded a grant to UJIMA, which is a national organization dedicated to ending violence against women in the Black community. With OVC funding, UJIMA runs a new National Center for Culturally Responsive Victim Services that is working to expand outreach and support to victim service programs in historically marginalized and disadvantaged communities. And this year, OVC will soon announce funding for a new initiative that will identify the needs of individuals who have suffered harm as a result of a failure or error of the criminal justice system. This is a big step in terms of how we think about who are victims and how we serve those who have been impacted. Turning now for a moment to community safety, we're taking a multifaceted approach that's really elevates community-based efforts to address gun violence and serious crime, that expands the role of community partners. And I know so many of you do work in this space specifically and are so grateful for your efforts and your leadership, which allowed for $50 million to be appropriated in FY22 for community violence intervention programs, which then doubled when the president signed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. So soon, and I mean very, very, very soon, OJP will announce investments of nearly $100 million this year to community organizations and local government agencies to expand infrastructure to build community safety and strengthen neighborhoods. We'll see new efforts and fund expansion plans in both community-based organizations and local government agencies. We'll support intermediaries to support smaller organizations. And Sue, I see we need 100 million is needed. Way more than 100 million is needed too. And that is not lost on us. We are trying to get even more funding out there. And we've got plans to try to get more out there as soon as we can, because we need to rely on the leadership from communities that have been doing this work for decades and have not had the support of the federal government, quite frankly, in the past. This is the first time we've had any significant investment in the community violence intervention field. And we know we need to do much, much more here. Again, so much of this would support the work of folks on this call and folks who are graduates and leading with conviction this year. And finally, we'll be investing in research and evaluation so we can further bolster the case and learn as we go that CVI is such a critical piece going forward. Many of our grants for this year have started to make their way out the door, and when all is said and done, we expect to make 3,500 awards totaling more than $5 billion. So if there's one thing that I can leave you with, it's one of the many lessons that I carry with me from my time at JOUSA. As the field becomes more open to and more intentional about including and recruiting directly impacted people, we need to be equally as intentional about supporting them. Trauma has a way of showing up in ways and at times that we do not expect. And it can affect all of us, regardless of where we are in our career or where we are at that moment in life. We often ask people to work in areas that are so closely connected to their own trauma, whether it's criminal justice reform, decarceration, or reducing violence. We are practically begging for people's past traumas to surface. And we have an obligation to support them so that they can manage it in a healthy way when it does. And what I'm talking about goes way beyond a typical healthcare plan or employee assistance program. I'll be honest, I don't really know exactly what this looks like. But I know that so many of you are leading organizations or leading teams that may include or do include formerly incarcerated folks and other people who have been directly impacted by the system. So I put this out there in hopes that collectively, we can develop and share strategies to help all of us be healthy and successful, and to help this become a core part of what the field does, particularly as the field, again, becomes much more intentional and much more open to having directly impacted voices at the table. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the incredible work that all of you do, and congratulations to the Leading with Conviction graduates.